Beneath the golden sands of Egypt, where the sun scorches the earth and the wind whispers across forgotten monuments, lie secrets so disturbing that even the priests who recorded them did so in trembling hieroglyphs hidden from the eyes of common men. The pharaohs we venerate today, those god-kings whose names echo through millennia, whose faces stare at us from museum walls with painted eyes that seem to follow our every movement, were not merely rulers of one of history's greatest civilizations. They were keepers of practices so deeply unsettling that if the full truth were carved into those towering temple walls, tourists would turn away in horror rather than wonder. Tonight, we're pulling back the veil on the royal elite of ancient Egypt, and I promise you, what lies beneath will change forever how you see those golden death masks and magnificent pyramids. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a journey into the afterlife that required meticulous preparation. But what they didn't tell you in school, what the museum plaques conveniently omit, is exactly what that preparation entailed for the royal family. When a pharaoh died, the mourning period began immediately, but so did something far more sinister. The king's servants, those loyal attendants who had spent their entire lives in devoted service, faced a choice that was no choice at all. Historical evidence suggests that in the earliest dynasties, these servants were expected to follow their master into death, not by their own hand, but through carefully orchestrated rituals that ensured the pharaoh would lack for nothing in the afterlife. Archaeological excavations of early royal tombs have uncovered rows upon rows of subsidiary burial bodies, arranged in precise patterns around the king's chamber, some showing signs of having been buried alive, their final moments preserved in contorted positions that speak of unimaginable terror. But the horror doesn't end with the servants. The royal family themselves participated in practices that would be considered monstrous by any modern standard. To keep the bloodline pure, to maintain the divine essence that supposedly flowed through their veins, the pharaohs engaged in systematic intermarriage that went beyond what we might consider acceptable even for medieval European royalty. Brothers married sisters as a matter of policy, not exception. Fathers sometimes married daughters. This wasn't scandal, it was sacred duty, a religious imperative to preserve the blood of the gods that coursed through the royal line. The genetic consequences were catastrophic, yet they persisted for thousands of years, creating generations of rulers who suffered from debilitating conditions, physical deformities carefully hidden by idealized art, and mental afflictions that may have driven some pharaohs to acts of inexplicable cruelty. The mummification process itself, that sacred ritual we've romanticized in countless films and documentaries, held its own catalog of horrors that went far beyond the simple preservation of the dead. When you died as a pharaoh, your body became a battlefield between decomposition and divinity, and the priests who performed this transformation were willing to do absolutely anything to ensure your flesh would last for eternity. They would extract your brain through your nose with a long iron hook, scrambling it into a liquid that could be drained away like so much waste. Your internal organs would be removed one by one, except for your heart, which they believed was the seat of your soul and would be weighed against the feather of truth in the afterlife. But here's what they do and tell you in those sanitized museum explanations. The embalmers had to work quickly, and the process wasn't always dignified or clean. Sometimes things went wrong. Sometimes the bodies were damaged beyond repair. And when that happened, when a pharaoh's corpse was mutilated during the sacred preparation, the embalmers faced execution for their failure, becoming unwilling sacrifices to their own mistake. If these truths unsettle you, if they've already changed how you see those golden sarcophagi and serene painted faces, then you understand why this history has been softened, sanitized, and made palatable for public consumption. But we're not here for comfortable lies. We're here for the truth that hides in the shadows of those magnificent ruins. If you want to continue this journey into the darkest corners of history to see what other civilizations hid from the light, then subscribe now, because what comes next goes even deeper into the nightmare that was royal life in ancient Egypt, and I promise you, you won't be able to look away. The question that haunts every serious scholar of Egyptology, the question whispered in academic circles but rarely addressed in public forums, is this: what happened to the children who were born wrong? In a culture obsessed with physical perfection, where the pharaoh was literally considered a living god whose body had to reflect divine proportion and beauty, what became of royal offspring who bore the unmistakable marks of the genetic catastrophe that generations of interbreeding had created? The archaeological record goes silent on this matter, but that silence itself screams volumes. There are gaps in the genealogical records, children who appear in early inscriptions only to vanish completely from later monuments, as if they had never existed at all. Some scholars believe these children were hidden away, sequestered in remote parts of the palace or sent to distant temples where they could live out their days far from public view. Others suggest something far more grim, that these imperfect children of the gods were quietly eliminated, their existence erased from history as thoroughly as any conquered enemy, because their very presence threatened the divine narrative that held Egyptian society together. Consider the case of Pharaoh Akhenaten, whose elongated skull and unusual body proportions have sparked endless debate among historians and medical professionals. Was he born with a rare genetic condition, or were his physical characteristics deliberately exaggerated in art to establish a new aesthetic? Either way, his reign represented a dramatic break from tradition, a revolutionary period where he attempted to overturn thousands of years of religious practice, declaring that only one God should be worshipped. But after his death, his name was systematically erased from monuments, his city was abandoned and left to crumble, and his son, the famous Tutankhamun, restored the old gods with a fervor that suggests genuine terror of what his father had unleashed. Recent DNA analysis has revealed that young King Tut himself was the product of incest, his parents' likely brother and sister, and he suffered from numerous genetic disorders, including a clubfoot and bone disease that would have made walking excruciatingly painful. He died at 19, and the rush to bury him, the haphazard nature of his tomb's preparation, suggests that his death was either sudden or somehow shameful, something that needed to be concluded quickly and quietly. The power struggles within the royal court were equally horrifying, games of survival where the stakes were not merely political position but life itself. Queens who failed to produce male heirs face exile or worse, their daughters sometimes married off to their own brothers in hopes that the next generation might succeed where they had failed. Rival wives plotted against each other with poisons and curses, commissioning magical spells inscribed on tablets and hidden in the walls of their enemies' chambers, calling upon dark gods to bring misfortune and death. The famous harem conspiracy, uncovered in ancient texts describing a plot against Ramesses III, reveals a world of shadowy intrigue where the pharaoh's own wives and sons planned his assassination, hoping to place a different heir on the throne. The conspiracy failed, and the punishments were swift and merciless. Those involved were given the option of taking their own lives rather than facing execution, a choice that preserved their family's honor while ensuring their deaths. Medical examination of mummies from this period has revealed evidence that Ramesses himself may have ultimately died from the assassination attempt, his throat cut so deeply that it nearly severed his spine, a wound his embalmers carefully concealed, but could not fully hide from modern imaging technology. The religious practices of the elite extended into territories that blur the line between devotion and depravity. The pharaoh was not merely a political ruler, but a high priest whose duties included ritual acts meant to maintain cosmic order, to ensure the sun would rise and the Nile would flood and the universe itself would continue to function. Some of these rituals, described in fragments of ancient texts, involved symbolic acts of such intimate nature between the pharaoh and representations of the gods that modern scholars struggle to interpret them, unsure whether to read the descriptions literally or metaphorically. The pharaoh's body was considered so sacred that even his bodily fluids were thought to possess magical properties, and there are accounts suggesting that these substances were collected and used in various religious ceremonies. The line between the divine and the grotesque became impossibly thin in these practices, creating a religious landscape where the most exalted rituals could also be the most disturbing. As we stand here at the end of this journey into the shadows of ancient Egypt, as you process these truths that history has tried so hard to bury beneath centuries of romantic mythology and Hollywood spectacle, you're left with an unavoidable realization. Those magnificent temples and breathtaking monuments, those golden treasures that draw millions of visitors every year, they weren't built by a civilization of enlightened philosopher kings. They were constructed by a culture that viewed human life through a lens so alien to our modern sensibilities that we can barely comprehend it, where the divine right of kings justified practices that would be considered criminal in any contemporary society. What disturbs you most about these revelations? Is it the human cost of divine kingship, or the realization that some of history's greatest achievements were built on foundations of suffering? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about the price civilizations pay for greatness.